Hello, my name is Richard Archdeacon and I'm here with Chris Leach. We're going to have a conversation about the role of the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO, in the modern enterprise. I've seen that its role change a lot over the last few years, Chris. What are the kind of observations you've seen in the role?
So even in my own career as a CISO, I think it's changed, and that pace of change is going quicker and quicker. But initially it started off, the CISO became the guy they targeted because he was the network guy. And then we became a little bit more formalized, and then we became the IT security guy, to where we are today, where the CISO covers issues from the disaster recovery business continuity sometimes, physical security in some cases, to cyber and privacy, and it's just constantly changing.
Yeah, I think it must be one of the most complex roles in a business organization today when you consider you've got to cover, as you say, privacy, compliance, international law, psychology, all of those points, and how you actually make security successful.
And what's interesting about that comment to me is that while it's extremely complex, if you do it well, it's as though you turn the lights on and they come on, and if they don't come on, you want somebody to complain to. But when it breaks, it becomes really difficult. So if you do it well, you're not really recognized for how well it's being done. And I think you're right.
Nobody recognizes the success.
Nobody recognizes success, but they sure do see the failure.
Yeah. One of the aspects of change I've noticed as well is the reporting line, where the CISO sits within the organization to reflect that broader remit that they have. And in many organizations I've seen, especially in the financial services, it's moved from being very much in the IT area out to perhaps under the risk area. So we're actually seeing a change in the dynamic of the reporting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that financial services tended to be on the forefront because they were under the microscope sooner and quicker. I personally have reported to a CIO, I've reported to a COO, I reported to general counsel. And so it kind of moves around. And I guess, do you have an opinion in your mind where it should report? And I'll give you my opinion after I want you to go first on that.
I think the answer depends on the maturity of the organization, and you have to understand how mature that organization is in terms of
that's
security.
The easy way out. It depends, right?
So some, as you say, the financial services, very compliance driven, a lot of regulation. It's probably going to come under risk or general counsel. But in other organizations, I think it'll still be in the IT organization reporting into the CIO.
I would argue that, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, I would argue, however, that there needs to be some bit of independence from IT. Because if you think about the underpinnings of what a CISO has to do depends on IT. And if IT can say my budget is being constrained for X reason, and therefore I need to take it away from the CISO, then my responsibility and my ability and capabilities are then also restricted. And so there needs to be some accountability. That an audit, I understand and I agree, provides some of that, but at the end of the day, I think there needs to be independence, and we are seeing more of that. And we're seeing more CISOs report or having dual reportingship outside the CIO's group into, like you say, a risk officer or a COO. And in one particular case, I talked to a CISO recently, he's actually reporting to the CEO. Now, what I find interesting about that, if you think about plausible deniability that we see all the time in corporate America, that's a brave and bold move by that CEO. I think it needs to be at that level, I really do, but it's really difficult when you look at the politics and the engines that go on in the corporations around the world.
I've also seen reporting into a CEO in very high-tech organizations, which are driving through a lot of change, and the technology is absolutely critical. So you're right, they might well be reporting into the CEO in those examples.
And it's difficult. I think it's ever changing. I guess, let me ask you a question from what you've seen. I know you focus a lot of your time in Europe, but from what you've seen as far as headcount changes and organizational movements and all those kinds of things, do you think the CISOs are equipped to handle the rapid change that's going on today in those arenas?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that any CISO faces, wherever they are, is the whole issue of headcount and how they manage that. So that's almost become a key driver to what they can do, what they want to do, what they can't do. So I think understanding that's an enormous dynamic, because they will always have a huge list of things they have to do, but it's actually getting the people to do them. They might often have the budget, but they won't have the capability. So it's managing that dynamic within this complex reporting environment. That is one of the changes I've seen coming through as well.
I never had enough budget. I never ever had enough budget. It was always cut headcount, improve efficiencies. I agree with you, but headcount is becoming more forefront of the discussions, right? To find the right individual at the right time and then to retain that right individual at the right time. And one of our issues I remember very distinctly was what's my progression within an organization if I'm a new engineer and I want to keep growing and one day I want to be a CISO. I think it's important that CISOs think about how do I retain good talent, attract good talent, but you also have to keep that flow coming in, and so there's a constant churn within the environment. It's very, very difficult. Let me ask you one other question. It's kind of along the lines that we've been talking about, and it's always been interesting to me. My opinion is that I think half of what a CISO does is in the political realm, the soft skills, the HR, the retaining and attracting people, talking. And I think if you do it well, then all the other stuff flows. Would you agree that that's an issue that we kind of forget? I think sometimes technologists want to deal with the bits and bytes of the world and don't want to deal or don't have the desire to deal with the softer side. So what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I think looking at it historically, it was always easy to dive into the technology as a solution by itself. However, that often causes more complexity and more of an issue. So I think it's understanding how to get those teams working, those whole dynamics. But I think we also have to start to look at how the CISO will be driven more by outcome rather than just by what they're doing. And this, I think, is part of the reflection of the change that they've had in their reporting position, who they're reporting to and what they've got to report on. If they're going to report up to the Risk and Audit Committee, they're going to have to understand their language. If they're going to be working at operational level, they're going to have to understand that language as well. So I think it's not only the soft skills, but it's also the communication skills, which have changed a lot and are becoming very important to the CISO. How they communicate to the wider organization what they're doing and how they're going to achieve it.
So to kind of summarize what we've been talking about, just as no two businesses are the same or look the same or operate the same, no two CISOs are going to be looking the same, operating the same, nor have the same roles and responsibilities.
Exactly.
So it depends.
It depends.
Back to what you said. So why don't we dive into a couple more of the elements deeper into what a CISO has to do in today's modern environment.
Chris, let's move on to another specific topic, regulation and compliance, a favorite with all CISOs. Do you think CISOs get enough time on their compliance skills, or should they be spending more?
You know which hot button to push of me, don't you? So I would tell you that most people don't understand the depth of compliance issues that a CISO deals with on a day-to-day basis. If you were to ask most CISOs who are in the chair today how much time they spend on compliance, you might be surprised that it's north of 70% of their day-to-day activities. So that takes away the rest of their time from doing the soft skills we talked about previously, takes away time from doing what we might want to call the sexier part of security with all the vulnerabilities and all the bits and bytes and the botnets and so forth. And you're dealing with, can I give to a regulator, that could be an internal regulator, an external regulator, a business partner, can I certify to them or prove to them that I'm doing things in a compliant manner?
I found that as well. Compliance is a huge burden for CISOs, and it really does distract them from getting on and addressing the issues that they have to. And the other thing I've noticed as well is that if you look at some of the major organizations, global organizations, especially banks, they have an enormous range of regulatory regimes they have to comply with. And it's an ongoing job the whole time.
Well, not only that, some of those regulations overlap and conflict with each other. So there may be a regulation in North America that will conflict with a regulation that's in Asia somewhere, and then that conflicts with a regulation that might be in the UK. And so it becomes very, very difficult. And here's the real problem, I think, with compliance, is many people, consumers especially, the boards, will think, I'm compliant and therefore I'm secure. And there's nothing further from the truth than that. Just because I'm compliant with an issue does not necessarily mean I'm secure.
So compliance, tick box, equals security. But we know it doesn't. You have to actually make the organization secure.
And that's a scary thing for the CISO, because his CEO will say, but I am compliant with, and yet there may be a breach, there may be a break-in, there may be whatever it is. So don't always think that compliance equals security.
And anything which helps the CISO report and show compliance is of great benefit to the CISO.
Lifts the burden, lifts the burden.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking about some of the operational responsibilities of a CISO. What interests me about the CISO role is they're trying to balance the whole time an external agenda and an internal agenda. By external, I mean changes which are coming in from the outside, then how do they manage them internally? And one area which the CISO is always aware about is the whole idea of vulnerabilities being reported, which you can't control. That comes out of software vendors and hardware vendors and so forth. But it's managing them internally that's really critical. It's easy to say, why don't you patch all the vulnerabilities? That would solve your security problem. But in operational sense, that's really not practical, is it?
So one thing I want to make point of, not all CISOs have security operations, right? So they may be accountable for the vulnerability. They may not be remediating the vulnerability, which even takes you one step further back from the issue that you're bringing up. But certainly patch management, assigning priorities to addressing vulnerabilities is more art than it is science, number one, I would tell you. Number two, just because a vulnerability comes out doesn't mean there's an attack live in the wild, so maybe exactly. I don't need to do anything about it. And then thirdly, sometimes if I patch something, I break something downstream. And so security a lot of times becomes the bad guy in any operations area, because they go, here comes the security guys again, we have to now patch something that's going to break something further down. And even if it doesn't break it, we sometimes get blamed for it because it's an easy scapegoat. So you're right, this is one of those areas that is very difficult to manage and hard to see what's going to come at you and what the downstream impacts are going to be. And yet when you think about it, and this may be overused, but if you think about it, the bad guys only need to be right once, and the enterprise needs to be right all the time to keep the bad guys out.
Also, what I find about vulnerabilities, how do you patch against one which is an unknown, a 0-day? One of those ones that's out there for sale at a huge amount, you can't patch against that. But also I think it finds as you've been putting across, the CISOs in the position where they're held accountable for this, but they don't have the authority often to fix it. And they can't go and ask for a key system to be brought down, to be patched urgently, if, for example, it's a payroll run at the end of the month, or if it's running the manufacturing process in a drug or a pharmacy organization. You just can't do it. So I think that they are in a very, very difficult position. And this is where they perhaps have to look at alternative forms of defense around that to try and cope with the inability to patch. And then secondly, what happens if something goes wrong? How do they then manage that process?
So certainly as you've kind of talked about the patching and the 0-day, there's a lot of information in the public domain or with vendors on how to address or what technologies may address those. And we haven't even talked about incident response and all those kinds of issues. I think the point that needs to be made very clearly is that it is very much an art form. And it comes from experience and dealing with different things that may go on within an environment and leveraging that skill set with others across the environment to then move from one of preparedness that we talk about all the time to recovery. But the discussion really should be about resilience, business resilience, cyber resilience, because issues are going to happen, incidents are going to happen, but how quickly can we recover? What are the processes in place that help us do that?
And I've seen a lot of work around that. How do you manage it and keep the business going whilst understanding how to repair what has happened, how to roll back the situation and make sure under control.
It's building the airplane while you're going down the runway. That's what it's about.
To go back to the vulnerability issue, I was speaking to a CISO the other day, and they said they wanted to know 3 things: their inventory, how well they knew their users, and how up to date they were with all their patching and their vulnerability. And that would be a huge help getting the basics right. But it's a lot easier said than done, I should imagine.
Because it's constantly changing.
It's a moving target.
It's that airplane.
One of the interesting topics of conversation with the CISO is the sheer amount of technology that's available to them. And one phrase which always used to be used often was defense in depth.
Oh, no. You mean defense and expense. It's really what you mean.
The use of an enormous range of technologies that provide, in the end, a lot of complexity, which in itself increased risk because they didn't work together, they didn't talk together. And what I'm finding now with CISOs is that they're looking for these technology solutions, but they're wanting to see them integrated and working together a lot more easily.
So here's the issue. We've already talked about the CISO being pulled many different ways, 80% of their time being spent in compliance. So I have my guy or gal who runs email security for me or communication security, whatever it is. I need to trust them to say, here's the best platform for our environment to protect us in this way. And so when you're getting all the directs that you have coming back with all these different solutions, the choices become is huge, and then it's how do I stitch all that together? But I have to trust my people to lead the path in some way, shape, or form. So we came up with a methodology. When I was a CISO, what I used to call the buy, hold, sell list. So the buy meant these were technologies we were evaluating. The hold, we liked what we had, and then the sell was, oh, this is not working for us, how do I get rid of it? But you're right, integration is critical.
And many CISOs I speak to say they want to be the Chief Information Security Officer, not the Chief Integration Security Officer, because that, again, detracts from what they're trying to do. So I think having that approach where you're continually looking at the technologies, almost like you would stocks and shares, what are we going to buy, what are we going to hold, what are we going to sell, keeps the technology refreshed, but also gives you a direction where you can make sure that it's integrating and working together, because that's going to help support your decision-making process going forward.
Integration is the key.
Absolutely.
If the technologies can't talk to each other, we're doomed, right? And so what did we come up with? The SIM is one of the tools we use today. My personal opinion, the SIM has a ways to go to get to where I think it ought to be with integration, or we need to look at how systems integrate and talk, because it is very difficult. We talked about 0 day previously. It becomes really even harder if systems are not integrated and talking to each other, because you're going to have a failure somewhere along that point.
You're going to have a gap into which the issue will fall. I always work on the principles, first of all, ease of use, ease of implementation, ease of integration. If you can achieve that, that's going to allow the CISO to use that technology and then concentrate on the rest of what they're going to do.
I'll give you one key that I used to tell vendors all the time. They came in with the latest widget, and whatever that widget was going to do, and I said, okay, I didn't even ask how much it was going to cost. I said, how many more people? And if they said it would cost me one more person, I'd say, we're done, get out of here, because I could not endure any more people. It was just going to be very difficult for me. So integration then becomes integration, automation. We're kind of headed down that way. AI, all machine learning. I don't think we're there, in my opinion. But again, if it's going to cost me more people, I don't have extra headcount. We've already talked about that issue.
And you have a whole list of projects you're trying to carry out anyway. So more head count requirement. What you're doing is you're then talking to the CISO about giving them an issue, not a solution.
Exactly.
I think we've covered the current role of the CISO and how complex it's become and how they have so many different responsibilities.
From 100,000 foot, way up high.
And I think there's a lot more detail we could go into a lot of those topics. But one of the areas that really interests me is how the CISO is having to manage the incredible change as businesses are driven by technology to change their business model. And so the idea of the CISO managing during digital transformation, I think is going to be an incredibly important part of the conversations going forward.
Couldn't agree with you more.